All right, let's call the meeting to order. Everyone rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Any changes to the agenda?
We provided the council with a revised agenda. The item that was added today was the authorization of a hire of a full-time police officer who received a resignation from Officer Manager of going to the city of Dayton. So we're looking for authorization to post the position.
Okay.
Motion to approve adopted agenda.
Motion by Kate,
Second.
second by Bryce. All in favor?
Aye.
It's adopted. We have a presentation tonight. Community survey results.
Bless you.
Les?
I hope those aren't your notes.
Yeah, we're here for a while. No, those are the cross steps if anybody has questions. So I can look at them, so. All right, it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening to go over the city survey that we conducted. To remind everybody what we did, we spoke with 250 randomly selected residents across the community. The interviews were conducted between January 18th and February 3rd. Average interview time was 14 minutes. The non-response rate was 5.5%. With a random sample of 250, the margin of error is plus or minus 6%. We have a little bit of a small sample correction just on the number of households. It depends on your universe, and you can sometimes gain additional margin of error if your universe is smaller, is under 2,000. I put up there at the bottom so you can see the distribution. 57% are cell phone only households, so a majority. 5%, that's about the lowest we have now. That always depends on the number of seniors in the house, in the community that are landline only, and then 38% have both landlines and cell phones. I'll say up front as we go through this, and just to keep this in the back of your mind, what we see in this survey is what we've seen in community surveys across the metro, across the state over the course of the pandemic. What has happened at a macro level, obviously, is people are not as happy as they used to be, and enthusiastically so, okay? Minnesotans are always very difficult to get to say something's excellent. Oftentimes good is good enough. But what we've seen now is the shift from excellent to good, and statistically significant drops across the metro. I mean, even in communities like Minnetonka, communities like Edina, where the excellent ratings have come down. They haven't gone unfavorable. They're just going into a good. And so it's not only the pandemic, but what we've also found is the pandemic has caused people to spend a lot more time in their community. For the first year of the pandemic, the community was kind of the recreational center for the community, and so they're much more aware of issues, especially when we talk code enforcement. Houses that they didn't used to walk by, but now they've started walking by, really start to bother them now that they notice them. So just keep that in mind as a context. You're going to see very positive results, but in some cases they're just less enthusiastic, and that follows the trend that we've seen across the metro. So, the good part about this now is we have actually, in some data, I put this one to 3 surveys, going back to 2012 on some of them. It just gets really cluttered. But now we can look at clear trend lines. One survey sets a baseline. After 3 or 4 now, we can see where trends are going. What were the factors in selecting to live in Elko New Market? This is open-ended. They can tell us anything. You can see some shifts over time. First off, and go back at the blue bar, the 2015, what led the list back then was the rural and open space at 22%. It's dropped to 14%. At the same time, a suburban response is now leading the list. And that's the growth factor. You now are becoming more suburban. You're not suburban, but you're becoming more suburban, and that housing was the determining factor. It's gone up 50% since 2015, from 14 to 21%. You also had a lot of people, and it's more than doubled in 7 years, saying they want to be close to family. That they moved out here, and now either they moved here to be closer to family, or the inverse happened. But it's gone from 8 to 18%. Quiet and peaceful, it's been about 1 in 8 folks pointing to that. The small town feel has been cut in half as a factor, and that's part of the growth now that's happened over the course of 10 years. And then we have a variety of things in single digits. If we look though and when we ask them another open-ended at the start, what do they like most about the city? First off, now we have all 10 years of history here. What led the list 10 years ago was small town feel. Almost a flat majority of people saying it, 43%. It dropped down 7 years ago, and it's just stayed at 1 in 4, talking about the small town feel. Quiet and peaceful went up 6 points, that's at 24%. Safe at 9%. Then we get the first suburban response at location at 8%. Rural and open space, friendly people, neighborhood and housing, schools tripled, it's still only 6% at this point in time, and then a great place to raise kids. The values folks have, while the factors might be changing on why they're moving here, what the values that they like most are still small town values, okay? That is what they value in living in the community, and it goes on throughout as they think about the future, especially on issues like growth. Now, what's the most serious issue facing the community? The number one issue has always been lack of businesses. You know, it's wavered from 15% to a high of 30%. This time we're back 10 years ago to 1 in 5 people talking about lack of businesses. The high cost of water. I don't know, this is a unique finding. I don't know how your water rates compare, but 1 in 7 people thought that the high cost of water was the most serious issue. High taxes at 10%, a little bit under. There's been a lessening of hostility on taxes across the metro area and across the state. Norm on that is about 15% right now. You've just been consistently at 1 in 10 throughout the last decade. The need for the grocery store remains 1 in 10, and mentioned that, down a little bit, although not statistically significant. Growth is at 8%, coming down a little bit. And so you can see the difference, and as we get into some of the growth issues too, or the new questions on growth, it's not so much that they're against growth, they're looking at for specific types of growth. And thus the lack of businesses at the top leads it. It's kind of a second tier growth issue. It's not, we don't want any more people to be here. Okay, now that we have people, let's start filling in the gaps of what people are looking for. Did you have a question?
No, you answered it.
I answered it? Okay. And then we go down the list. The road repair, the drinking water quality now is down from a third to a third of what it was in 2015, from 17% to 5%. And then let's go to the bottom, the nothings. Those are the boosters in the community. They see no problems here. This has yo-yoed all over the place over the decade, from a low of 6 all the way up to 23%. To give you context, right now you're at 14%. And like I said, as people have been in the community a lot more in the last 2 years than they ever have been, spending time living here, this number, this nothing, this booster core has actually dropped. The norm right now is 5%. Where people would used to say nothing, now they think of things. And so you actually have almost 3 times the norm over the last year on the booster core in the community. Now, how do they rate the quality of life? This shows what I was talking about at the start. Overall, 96% rate the community favorable, 4% only fair. Nobody has ever said poor, and nobody said it was unsure. Folks normally live, the ratings on this is typically between 85 and 95%. If you live in a community that you think is only fair or poor, you're probably going to be looking to move soon. You're not going to want to stay in that community. So what differentiates communities is always the excellent versus the good, the enthusiastic rating. You do have a statistically significant drop in the excellent. The shift is over to the good. And that's what we've seen. To give you the comparison, that 37%, so in 2018, before the pandemic, the norm excellent across Minnesota was about 21, 22%. Right now, so you were twice as high. Right now, the norm is about 12 to 13%. So you're 3 times higher on the excellent rating, the enthusiastic rating. So while there is a shift, it's just what we've seen across the metro and the state. The shift isn't from positive to negative. It's from enthusiastically positive to a soft positive. But your enthusiastic, that excellent rating, relatively in comparison is very strong. Now, how do they rate the value of city services? This is the question that asks, when you think about the property taxes you pay and the city services you receive, how do you rate that value? Last time 78% rated it favorably, this time 73% rated it favorably. Note it's not a statistically significant difference. Any statistically significant difference would have to be greater than 7% with the margin of error. So you're 73 to 26. You can see you only have 2% poor, 24% only fair. So we're looking at 73, 26, about 3 to 1. This one always varies. It depends on the property tax mood in the community. It depends on the level of city services. What we typically want to see is this better than 2 to 1. Okay, so people do, even folks that are saying that, you know, and I always look for the crosstab, looking at those that I think we had 10% that said property taxes was the most serious issue. Amongst that group, they split 60-40. So even if they said they thought their taxes were high, it's netting out positive when they consider the services they're receiving. So in an evaluation going through, and what we do is we ask a 4-point scale: excellent, good, only fair, poor. The blue is the excellent and good combined, only fair and poor is the red. You can see the sea of blue instead of a red riptide. So as we go through this, police protection, 97% favorable, 2% unfavorable. It's been pretty stable now over the last 4 years, up from where it was a decade ago at 83 to 17. Fire protection's always been high, 94 to 6. Park maintenance, you can see 10 years ago, we had 11% unfavorable. Now you're at the high over the course of the decade at 95 to 4.
Peter, in those areas, service areas, what are you seeing as the average in each area as far as a favorability rating in those service areas?
Oh, individually?
Yeah.
Well, police, the norm would be about 90%, okay? It's gone down a little bit, but not as much as I think some people think. The perception of police, it's kind of like folks' perception of Congress. You ask about their congressperson, they love them. You ask them about Congress, they hate them. So if people think there's an issue with police, it's elsewhere. They tend to love their police, so the norm is about 90%. Fire protection is about 90%. Park maintenance varies all over the place. That depends on how old the community is. Last park bond, the 95 to 4 is off the chart. But you are a newer community, it wouldn't be fair to compare you to, say, Crystal on that. Continuing, city recreation programs at the high, well, just below the high of 2015, 90 to 6. You can see the growth in a decade when we started at 68 to 19. So whatever improvements were made coming out of that 2012, it stabilized in the minds of the community. Code enforcement. Last time, 78% favorable to 15% unfavorable. I understand you did make some changes. You can see the result of those changes now. It's the high over the course of 4 years ago, 91 to 3. And this one, the norm is about 75%. So you were closer to the norm, and now you're among the top 2 on code enforcement. Street repair and maintenance, well, it is one of the lower rated for you. It's 87-13. Right now, the norm on that is 55 to 45. Okay, this is always there's a winter spring norm and a summer fall norm when we look at street repair and maintenance and snow plowing. Because if we're doing a survey in September, people already forget about everything that, you know, if they hit the mailbox or you have potholes back then, they're fixed. The 87 to 13 is one of the highest we have during the spring and winter surveying period. And similarly with the snow plowing. Just to give you a note, that 2015 on snow plowing at 95 to 5, that was a summer survey. Okay, 87 to 13, outstanding also. So, what city services need to be improved? This is open-ended. They can tell us anything. And so 3 hit double digits. I always tell clients that when you look at an open-ended, if you have 20 to 25% indicating that there's a problem or something needs to be improved, it's something to note. You don't have anything that hits that threshold. You have 3 at double digits, water treatment plant at 15%, 10% each saying street repair, street maintenance, and 10% snow plowing. Go down to the bottom, 43% say no, there are no city services that need to be improved. If we look at, does the city, are there any additional city services that the community would like to see? Going back to 2015, 86% said none. Now you can start to see, though, some of the fill-in, that second tier growth. Okay, we're here now, so let's start looking at some amenities. So over the last 2 surveys, it's gone down to 2/3 saying no, still a majority, but now some people are starting to mention things. Community center, it was 15% in 2018. It's the high, but it's still 9%. So it's there.
Just a question, but this is the percentage of people that said there needed to be a difference, correct? So it's 15% of the percentage of people that said that we need.
No, this is open.
This is open, okay.
This is open-ended. In the 8% mentioned recreation programs, 3% facilities, 2% talked about sidewalks. But you really don't have anything 20, 25% at this point in time. But you can start to see people starting to pick things instead of just saying, no, everything's good on city services. Code enforcement. Whatever changes you've done, you've done it perfectly, because you always want this to be the bell-shaped curve. For every person you make unhappy, you're thrilling the equal amount. You've done that. 4% say you're too tough, and told my phoners all sorts of horrible things and tickets they got and everything like that. And 4% said you're not tough enough. 89% said it was about right, okay? The norm on not tough enough right now is 25%. Okay, this is a new question that we added into the survey, so we don't have the comparison. But you've turned the dial perfectly to balance out noise on both sides. Thus, do they support more active code enforcement? No, this is logical then, because they're happy with it. They're satisfied. So you have 41% say yes. You have 56% that oppose. But you can see there's very little intensity on this. 2% strongly favor, 6% strongly oppose. So whatever changes have happened, it's balanced it, and now to go become more active, there's not the appetite in the community. So what do they like most about the growth in the community? Open-ended, 24% says attracting new businesses. 16% talk about the young families moving in. 12% said it's creating a larger tax base. 8% bring more jobs, brings diversity, more business revenue, the small town feel, higher property taxes, more entertainment options. If you go down to the bottom, that's the group that is against growth, but it's only 13% at this point in time. And so, I've been doing this long enough, over 30 years, so I mean, Woodbury was a village when I started doing this and asking these sorts of questions. And as they went through the growth in the 90s, in the first part of this century, the nothings was pretty solid at 30-35%. The higher growth areas and everything go to Rogers as those have developed. Maple Grove, Plymouth, all of those sorts of things tends to have a core constituency of 25, 30, 35% that are against the growth. They're reacting. And interestingly enough, in the suburban area, most people think that it'll be the settlers, the ones that have been in the community for longer than 20 years. It's actually the reverse. It's new residents. The kind of the thought process they have is, okay, I've got here, let's put a moat around the city, bring the drawbridge up. We don't want any more growth. It's the settlers that actually are more supportive of the growth. But that 13% is very low comparatively. Now, what do they like least about growth? Let's talk about the bottom again right away, because normally the nothing on this always has been being outweighed by the nothing on what they like most, the anti-growth versus pro-growth. You actually have 1 in 5 folks, 20%, saying there's nothing I don't like about the growth. So it tips at a +7 in favor of the pro-growth than anti-growth. You only have 2 that hit double digits, the concern on losing the small town feel, 16%, and 11% just saying too many people. If you go down the list, you do have the concern of bringing the inner city and the metro area to suburbia. 9% brings crime, 9% more traffic, and then losing rural open spaces, and right down the list. But in just the open-ended concept of what folks like most and what they like least, the community definitely tips in favor of growth. So we went through a list of characteristics and we asked, does the city have too many, about the right amount, or too few? It's set up like a stoplight. The green is too few, bring more in. Red, too much, stop. Yellow, about the right amount. If we look at parks, trails, open spaces, 84% say you have about the right amount. 15% say not enough. Service shopping opportunities, not surprising. When we go back to the earlier open-ended, 58% say not enough, 39% about right, 3% too many. Entertainment establishments, 2% too many, 70% about right, 28% too few, and then you have an insatiable demand for, I'm going to open a restaurant with retail option here. We have 58% saying not enough restaurants, 40% about right, restaurants at too many restaurants at 2%. I always tell, if you want to prioritize this, look at the too many and too few and do a plus minus. So if we look at the service and shopping opportunities, it's actually plus 55% of folks saying we want more. On restaurants, plus 56. On parks, trails, and open spaces, it's plus 13. On entertainment establishments, it's plus 26. So there's a mood on all of these, but there's a prioritization in folks' minds on service, shopping, and restaurants. Now, would they support financial incentives for those development? You're unique on this one. No, they would not. Well, it's a bare majority, 52%. 37% opposed, 10% are unsure. This is actually very similar to before the recession. So if we go to before 2008, folks across the state were not supportive of financial incentives for development. It's kind of free market Minnesota. The recession caused the shift in attitudes and opinions on the use of financial incentives. So the norm right now is about 75% of people supporting financial incentives. So you're about 23, 24 points lower than the norm. It's still a majority, but it's a smaller majority than we typically see on the desire to use financial incentives. What about housing options then? Just like the first set, it's set up like a stoplight. The move-up housing, the 300,000 to 500,000, has the highest number of people saying about the right amount, and it actually has a negative. You have more people saying there's too much than too little at a -8. Similarly, on the high-end housing, 64% say about right, but it's 16 to 6, it's a -10 saying there's too much. On the reverse, you have apartments and condos, townhouses, starter homes less than 300,000, and then assisted living and one-level housing, where you have anywhere between 33 and 47% saying not enough. What folks started talking about, and this is pretty typical, in a community with growth, but it's also typical of a community that folks really like living in. When you have 37% rating at excellent, go back, is the thought people are telling us, I want a place for my kids to move back into this community, and I want a place for me to live in if I want to stay in this community when I downsize. This is the life cycle housing concern. You've hit the middle well, and now it's the concern on the front years of life and the back end of life for housing options in the community. So it really is a good problem to have. You want people to want to stay in the community, or for their kids to come to the community or come back to the community. But this is pretty clear on the starter homes, affordable housing without all the negatives that has with it, but then on the other side of life, towards the end of life type options. Now, would they support financial incentives for housing? No, they would not. 32% indicate that they would support, 67% oppose. They don't feel strongly, but it tips definitely in opposition. And we see this pretty typically where we do see, like I mentioned, the higher support for financial incentives for development. Housing, it's much tougher to get people to support financial developments to incentivize housing because people just see developers and growth and everything and think that they can go ahead and build those buildings, and the city does not need to incentivize that sort of development. So when you're going through growth, what's the community? How does the community evaluate? Have you done a good job in city services keeping pace with the growth? Yes, 75% say you have, 12% say no, 13% are unsure. The 13% that are unsure were newer residents, so they didn't have the basis in order to say what it was 10 years ago. Police patrolling. We split out in developing the survey, looking at police patrolling across the community and in their neighborhoods. And you're going to see this in the other ones that we separated out. Folks really don't differentiate. Folks are very satisfied here with the amount of police patrolling. Almost 9 out of 10 in the community and their neighborhood. It's always funny, the 2 to 3% who say too much. There's stories there, and then the 8 to 10% that say not enough. That's about, that norm has gone up across the metro area, not surprisingly, because crime is the #1 concern across the metro area right now, up to 30% as a norm of not enough police patrolling. Similarly, on traffic enforcement, a little bit less saying about right, 8 out of 10 on both the community and the neighborhood, 12 and 13% saying not enough, and 4 and 2% too much. The norm on this is about 20% not enough at this point in time. So you're just over half of that. Stop sign violations. This one varies along with speeding, but only 19% said it was a serious concern in the community, and 18% serious concern in their neighborhood. The vast majority, 7 out of 10, say both. It's not a concern in either of those. Typically, we tie it with speeding. So, to separate out and get the concern on traffic, speeding, stop sign violations and everything across the metro is about 45% in the very serious and somewhat serious. So this actually makes sense then to look back to the previous 2 charts. If folks don't think it's a serious problem, then the police are probably doing a good enough job patrolling that they don't have the desire to have more patrolling. What is the greatest public safety concern? Well, 38% say you have no public safety concern. 2 hit double digits, youth crimes and vandalism, and traffic speeding. 9% residential crimes. The use of ATV, UTV, and golf carts, boy, my phoner's got lots of stories on people using them where they shouldn't be using them. It's a very, very specific group of people. Drugs at 5%, business crime 4%, identity theft at 2%. So you have what we will classify as concerns. They're not major concerns. The 38% saying nothing right now, norm across metro on that is 5%. Have they had contact with the police department? Yeah, 24% said they had. And then we have followed up, how would they rate that contact? Now keep in mind, some of these weren't the most ideal situations to have contact with a group of people. So the norm that we're normally looking for on this is 80% favorable. That 4 out of 5 are going to say it was a positive, is 93%, with 51% saying excellent. Only 7% said only fair or poor. And you could see then we also followed up and asked, did the police officer act in a professional manner, kind of regardless of how you thought the contact went? And the result of the contact, 98% reported that the police acted in a professional manner.
Ian, what do you typically see in surveys around the metro for contact with the police department as a percentage of the respondents? We have 24% that have had contact with the police department.
It will depend on the activity of the police department, especially when you're dealing with community events, because it goes beyond just, do you get stopped? Do you see them at a community celebration, all of those sorts of contacts? 1 in 4 would be probably a little bit on the high side, more in that 15 to 20%, unless you have, some of those really major, in a lot of activities by the police department. That's 1 out of 4 people having contact is pretty high. Going to Park and Rec, do the recreation facilities meet the needs of your household? 89% say yes, only 7% say no. Recreation programs, 87% say they meet the needs of their households, only 8% say no. So basically on both of the facilities and the programming portion of recreations, the programming for recreation, 9 out of 10 people are satisfied with where what level of service they're being provided. This is, the norm on this would be about 80%. Now this doesn't mean that they don't support other things. Okay, so this isn't a question of, okay, everything's perfect, because we didn't go through a list and say, would you support this and that sort of thing. This is just, when they think about what they currently have, yes, it meets the needs. Participation in city programs on recreation, very high, 36%, but you have a lot of households with children. I think it was like 57% households with children, and that's what always drives. The norm on this is about 21%, but with 57% households with children, I'm not surprised at 36% indicating they have participated. I guess there's room for improvement, but not much, 99 to 1 on the satisfaction with the program. Community events. Do the existing events meet the needs of your household? Absolutely. Just like the recreation programs and facilities, 87% said yes. When they think about the amount of community events, and we told them, gave them a list of the community events, 80% said that seems like about the right amount, 1% said too many, 16% said too few, and 3% are unsure. So you've really struck a balance. You're never going to have 95% say, yeah, I have about the right amount of community events. You've struck a nice balance as the community has grown with the number of events you have. Contact with City Hall, 37% indicated that they contacted City Hall during the past year. That's a little bit on the high side. The norm on this before the pandemic was about 31%. It's gone down to about 24%. The pandemic has obviously limited the amount of contact folks have been able to have. So 37% is a fair amount of contact. Following up with the 37% that said they've had contact, how do they rate the response time? 99% rated favorably. Courtesy of staff, 98% favorably. Threshold for this is always 80%. So you have more people that have had contact with City Hall, and you have higher rankings of that contact. Sometimes familiarity breeds contempt. That's not the case. Familiarity actually breeds praise in this instance. Where are folks getting their information? Newsletter at 43%. City Facebook, that is the high that we have at 23%. This is open-ended. They can tell us anything. The norm on Facebook as a principal source of information is 4%. So you're almost 5 times as high. You're actually more than 5 times higher. 22% the city website, 7% word of mouth, 2% mailing, 3% scattered. Now, how do they prefer to receive information? Look at this first as electronic versus print. So 47% want the newsletter, 5% indicate mailings, so you have 52% of majority that prefer something in print in their hand. On the opposite side, on electronic, 20% the website, 19% Facebook, 4% community Facebook, 3% email newsletter, so we have 46% in an electronic version. You actually have the perfect split. I think cities dream of the day that they won't have to produce a print newsletter because it'll save money. You have to do both. But this is also unique with 19% indicating Facebook. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone over the last 5 years. Social media is not, everybody uses it, but nobody likes it. Well, actually, not everybody uses it. But folks really don't like it because now there's not only an age divide, there's a political divide. So it really is unique. Your Facebook here is a principal source of information and a preferred source of information. The city newsletter, 83% indicated that they've read the city newsletter. How do they rate the quality? 99-1. The city website, 52% indicate that they have accessed the city website. 94% rated the content favorably, 6% only fair or poor, and 90% rated the ease of navigation favorably. So the website, this one varies with how much reliance, how much material is on. The typical would be probably about 55 to 60% saying that they've accessed the city website. The norm on the rating of content and the ease of navigation always depends on how close we are to an update of the website. So I don't know when yours was updated. I would guess that it was fairly recently because it's very positively regarded. Really?
Yeah.
Well, whatever it is, you've put materials on there since 10 years ago, right?
We have.
Okay.
Well, and probably an increasing variety of content, but maybe the overall, I'm thinking about things even in my department that are now available through the website that.
When we set up the website, we were very good about distilling what we put on there. We put in the stuff that 90% of the people are looking for and can get to it in 3 clicks. So we've always done very well on our website. But our website, the layout and everything is, the model is aged, it's about a decade old. So we're looking to update that with ARPA funds that'll be forthcoming. So.
And then finally, social media. First off, we ask them, do they use the social media? Now, a part of this is driven, and going back to the principal and preferred source of information, when you have the amount of households with children, they're younger, and so they're using social media more, especially Facebook. Like my 21-year-old tells me all the time, parents have ruined Facebook. So the young kids don't go on it, but parents are going on it. 75% of the community is using Facebook. 73% say, yes, I would be likely to use Facebook to receive information from the city. Twitter at 39%, that's 3 times higher than the norm with 36% saying to use it, and they're likely to use it, especially because Twitter is the one, obviously over the news cycle of this week. I mean, one side was irritated before this week, now the other side's irritated this week, so God knows what will happen with Twitter. But you do have 3 times the normal amount of people saying, yeah, give me information on Twitter. YouTube, more split, and Nextdoor, more split. The one thing to keep in mind as you're going through and everything is, a lot of communities, social media is an accessory. It's something that you have to do, that a certain number of people will look at. Your community is more important. It really is relied on by a lot of folks to receive information. So I think that's it. I can roll across tabs if you want. We can talk for another hour and a half, or I can answer any questions you have.
That's great. Yeah. Nicely done.
Who has questions? Josh, you have something to say, you always do.
Do you know what the average age of the survey?
Yeah, I can.
I'm baffled on the water treatment plant. 15% think we need to improve the water.
Water. It's the hard water. We still have, even though we've dramatically improved the rust and magnesium issue with the water treatment
Oh,
plant, we still
that's
have
true.
most of the
Hardness.
hardest water in the metro, so.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So despite that, we, still have, it's only 15% thinks that's the biggest issue. But I'm guessing that would be it. When we've talked to staff, we recognize that that's probably the biggest issue with the water right now. So on the newsletter, so the interesting part is, Peter's right, we're kind of hoping for the day where the newsletter can go away. And yet, for the last 2 surveys, it's shown that that is the primary resource of our communications, yet it's the one public outreach item that we spend the least amount of time and resources on. So we spend vastly more time on social media management than we do on the city newsletter, even though it's the predominant source of information that we provide our residents.
Wow.
Jake had asked a question in the back, right?
Yeah, you answered it.
Oh, he did, okay. What was the, I missed the answer.
About 38 and a half.
About 38, okay.
Yeah, you're a young community with lots of folks. I will say one thing when I think about the social media, what the Alliance folks have on it. And not just social media, but also electronic. Oftentimes, when you have higher reliance in a community on electronics media, some sort of electronic media, because you have Facebook and sending notifications and everything, but it requires you to click on it and go and search out information, the website also. We typically see higher levels of uncertainty when we ask about specifics in a community. I make the comparison, it's because it's a mile wide and an inch deep. You pull up the page, you look at it, you really don't go beyond that. A newsletter or a newspaper has the opportunity, it can be more in-depth and can lead people to actually go search things. But your folks, we don't see those higher levels of uncertainty when we look at specific questions like city services and those sorts of things. So if you have emphasized, however you've done Facebook, it has, and the website, both of those, you've done a good job in providing information at a level of detail that would be atypical, I think, for a lot of communities.
So to summarize some of the growth stuff, 'cause I know that was one of the topics that we added some questions or tried to tweak it a little bit. So if I heard you correct, there is a majority of the community that is interested or favorable of more growth, particularly with services or shopping. Restaurants was one of them. And because of the housing we brought in, they're hoping for more of those amenities, those types of services. And then from the housing standpoint, there's a majority that are favorable of bringing in more apartments, townhomes, assisted living, senior community, or senior-like housing options and starter homes, but less of a desire to do any financial incentives to bring those in.
Yes.
Is that a good summary?
Perfect summary of it. Yeah, the front and back end of lifestyle housing and places for people to shop and eat. You have a narrow majority supporting financial incentives for the latter and opposition for the former on housing. It is, but the community nets out. You do not have, as you've gone through the growth, the amount of anti-growth that we would typically see. You've really managed the growth well and set expectations, I think, for folks. I think when they came in, they realized that it wasn't going to stay. If they moved in 10 years ago, it probably would look pretty different. Instead of reacting negatively to that, they're actually thinking, okay, how do we improve what we have?
And with the financial incentive piece, was there any definitions or understanding or like, what does that mean to them? Is it a financial incentive that might increase their taxes or, I'm just wondering any depth to that at all.
No, we don't. We had one client that insisted that we come up with 3 sentences on TIF. probably about 15 years ago. And I know, my business partner is a master's, is a doctor in math. My other business partner is a doctor in English, and between the two of them, they couldn't figure out how to come up with 3 sentences to, just describe TIF. So we keep it broad in the sense. It's more of a concept. Now, that's not to say that if you had something specific, if you just if you said, would you support financial incentives to bring a super target here, it might have a very different answer because it's something specific. Instead of more, this one is more philosophical in the support opposition divide. But
So with
philosophy always switches on politics and also what I like.
And that makes sense. I mean,
Education
just
thing.
based on the conservative nature of our community, I mean, that we would probably likely see that response. I mean, versus getting further into the metro or more liberal communities, we would potentially, maybe you can see this with some of the other surveys, you tend to flip that more. I mean, we're very rural and conservative, so I could see the financial incentive just being a all-out philosophical law.
I think it's an education thing.
Yeah.
I really do. I mean, when we had that meeting, I don't know, however many months ago, I mean, the feedback after that, I mean, there's just kind of a lack of understanding as to what financial incentives actually mean. I don't know. It's just my
So that's the thing to keep in mind with the survey. It's a different topic area, but when you look at city facilities, 80%, 89% are saying, hey, we have sufficient amount of facilities. Well, what that tells you is that if there was a point in time where we needed to do a parks referendum, this is plenty not to do it. This isn't a put your finger to the winner specific survey. It's just telling you that you may need to do a lot of education to get a clear answer from the community at that time. So it's information. It's not a. It's not. It doesn't dictate a decision. It just gives you information for making a policy decision.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, to Todd's point and the mayor's point also, that's exactly, this shows the philosophy. There's always, people are becoming more and more tied to their philosophy leading over to action, but this can definitely be moved on specifics. Just did a city up in Anoka County on a park bond referendum where we had, 85% of people say, yeah, the needs meet, the facilities meet my needs. But when they look at a park bond referendum, and I think it was $5 a month, something like that, and we had specifics, community center, connecting trails, everything like that, it was like 65% support. So it doesn't necessarily, we're going from general to specific philosophy to actually, okay, yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Just in front of the council is our intent as staff to come back to the council later in the year after we rush through all of this on a basically a department basis and come back with maybe some more specific analysis on what we think some of these results may tell us or us or indicate that we need to do research further.
Public comment. Commissioner Wolf.
How are you, Mr. Mayor, council members, everybody, Tom Wolf, just a couple things. 27's closed, down past that, I don't know if anybody's gone that way, but today somebody in the room got pulled over for going through. It was me. The guy go to my mechanic is just like, I just went down this road and boy, they attack. How am I supposed to, well, you gotta go around and all this and you go through this little bit.
You dropped it, do you know who I am?
I didn't have to, I had it in lights on my car. I didn't know, he didn't have a clue. He was like from some other place. So that's closed, 13 is gonna have some road closures, I think, this summer too, so stay away from that side. Vermilion Watershed Planning Commission has an open spot, so if anybody here or listening would like to apply for that, I think there's 10, 12 meetings a year. Learn a lot about the Vermilion. It starts here in Elko Market and New Market Township, so it's kind of a nice resource, and You know, they're trying to get it back to where it was back in the 30s, before some of the farmers, you know, a lot of rivers, they all meander, and a lot of the farmers thought, you know, it would be really nice if we just straightened this out, the water would go through and we could farm more. They're putting them all back, all the meandering, because that's the best for the waterway. So that's all I have tonight. So, yeah, don't go through that 27.
There's barricades for a reason.
Anyone else care for speaking for public comment? Not. We'll close public comment, move on to consent. Don't have any items on the consent they want to pull?
Motion to approve consent agenda.
Motion by Kate,
Second.
second by Amanda, all in favor?
Aye.
Consent passes. No public hearing, so on to general business.
First item is Commissioner and Council compensation. Council previously directed staff to, indicated one, that they wanted to talk about the topic further, and then had directed staff to go and do some research on the topic and return to council with the findings. What we found, well, we approached it this way. We took a sample of just our Scott County neighboring cities, and then we added on top of that those cities that we use for compensation analysis for employees, because generally they are more similar to us with regards to the nature and characteristics of the community. When you go through and you do that analysis, what we find for purposes of the council is that, give me 1 second, put up here so I get the numbers right, is that for the mayor compensation, the average compensation was $554 and change, and council members was $423. Currently, we compensate the mayor $400 per month and council members $300 per month. So what we found is that the base salary that they receive, that you guys are currently receiving, is lower than the average for the sample group that we utilized. The other thing we found out is that there's a notable portion, approximately a third of the survey respondents, that provide some form of per diem compensation in addition to that base pay, meaning that for assignments like Minnesota Valley Transit, I-35 Solutions, those types of items, they would get a compensation that was most commonly a $50 per diem. And some also gave a $50 per diem on top of the base pay for council meetings as well, though it was a very small percentage. On that item, I'd like to make the comment that staff would recommend that make it a straight base salary rather than per diems. In other organizations where I've seen that they've done that, it can become a political item. So I would say set your salary to include the assumptions related to that. The other thing that we took a look at was compensation for commissions. And what we found was that actually the majority of the communities in our group do not compensate their commissioners at all. And those that do, we found out that the average is about $50 for the chair. We pay $65, and the average salary for the commissioners was $45, and we pay $50. So we are actually compensating more than the majority, and we're compensating more than the average for our commissioners. So one other unique item that we found is that some of the cities, and in Scott County this would include Savage, Prior Lake, and Belle Plaine, they actually set their council compensation. They tie it to the COLA adjustment they make for non-union employees, or some other COLA adjustment that they provide within their employees' salary schedule over time. And of course, every so many years they'll go true it up, but that allows for an annual adjustment. I spoke with the city attorney because I wasn't sure how that worked with regards to, people do it, but is it legal? Question. And it turns out that it is, because the whole idea of the statute.
That's good. It would be funny if it wasn't.
The whole idea of the statute is you're determining the compensation for future councils. Well, you can do that. The statute doesn't limit the methodology in which you determine that. You can either do it on a set amount, or you can set it to some sort of an index that is preset that flows into the future. So those are the major takeaways from the findings. I have to thank Linda. She did all the research on this, and sometimes connecting with all the cities and tracking that down is not always the easiest thing, so she did a good job on that. With that, we'd stand for questions, unless you guys just want to go right to the discussion.
Kind of questions? I'd recommend for mayor and council, $100 a month increase. No change to commissioner salaries. That'd be my suggestion. That's-
Yeah, no. When was the last time we did this? Maybe 2016, 17?
2016, we're effective in 2017.
Does anyone object to that?
I don't like these conversations. To be honest, I don't. I'm indifferent. I don't know if I'd really support it, but
Kate, Amanda?
I don't have strong feelings either way.
I don't either. I'd do this for free, but
Yeah, I mean, I think we should do something every so many years, and it's been a while since we've done something.
No, I absolutely think, and not even just for us, but for future councils
Right.
too, to be able to attract and retain people that are actually interested in it beyond just the volunteer nature of it and the goodwill and the thanklessness that it is
Yeah.
at times. I think that's where my brain goes.
Yep.
So,
I'm 100% with you. Yeah, and this wouldn't affect this council, it would go into effect next year, right?
Correct, so the council would need to pass an ordinance before the general election, if I remember correctly, and would go into effect then after the first of the year, after that council takes office.
So any different proposals, or the three that are indifferent? So
and when all
you-
hits
you-
the fan, we just say mayor wanted it.
Yeah, that's
you
fine.
know, so it's
He's like taking a risk. We may not get to see that compensation that he's asked.
the bus just got backed up.
No, I fully support it.
Yeah.
There was one other item I needed direction on
Yeah.
as well, was the idea of waivers for commissioners who did not want to receive compensation. We've had light inquiries over the years, but we had a recent appointee who was a little more stronger on it. I've discussed it with him since the initial inquiry, said he's okay either way, but it is a question that we probably should resolve. You can do it, although the city attorney's office has indicated that in order to do it, you would have to adjust your compensation resolution to include for the waiver that would be in place until they revoke the waiver. That's all been legal. One thing that was pointed out is the potential, not say it will happen, that you could get into political shaming related to it.
Who doesn't waive, who
Yep.
does
Yep.
waive,
Yep.
yeah.
Usually what we suggest to individuals, if they don't want to receive it, if you really don't want the money, take it and donate it to a
Yep.
cause. So,
I completely agree with
Yeah, I
that.
do too.
Yep.
Yep, again, it's bigger than one person,
It is.
one
Yep.
council, one commission, it's,
yeah.
Well, and I think your point of attracting applicants applies here too, so just
Yeah.
leave it as it
Yeah.
is.
okay.
All right, so are we good on this
Mhm.
item? All right. Item B, the fun with the fire rescue agreements.
So, it's been a very busy 3 days on this particular topic. I have been given to understand that Cedar Lake Township will be delivering a signed copy of the extension agreement tomorrow. So I think you can still make the same motions that are presented in the staff memo. It covers all the bases and what we expect to happen, and still covers us in the event that those expected things don't happen. What it does is it puts us in a position where we're kind of waiting to see what Cedar Lake Township does with regards to the 22 to 24 agreement. So far, they haven't indicated that they have any particular or specific issues with the agreement, but they also haven't indicated that they fully expect it to be approved. We do understand that they will be considering it at their meeting on Monday, and if they do approve it on Monday, then the Newmarket Township agreement would be approved and we're good to go for a 3-year period. And then we'll have another 2 years of negotiations for the next contract. So, That was a little bit of a joke.
Well,
So,
is it?
You might
Yeah.
need to start.
but it does move us down the road for a few more years. And that was the compromises in order to give on making a modification to the contract, to the formula this year. Newmarket Township requested a shorter term on this contract so they could get a bite at the apple a little sooner to revisit the issue. So this was the compromise.
Okay. So what are you looking for from us, Tom?
You could make a motion to approve the fire service, rescue and service agreement, fire and rescue service agreements pursuant to the staff recommendation, and then you don't have to read all that.
So
So moved. Second.
I'm giving
Good luck with
Kate
that.
the motion, Amanda the second, all in
Wait,
favor?
wait, can we do a little bit more
Aye.
discussion?
Discussion,
Yeah, I mean, after.
Before we vote.
Before we vote.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is there anything publicly that we want to put out there to,
I knew you were gonna ask this.
I mean, because it's just, I mean, if people can read this, and that's fine, if they're so inclined, but is there anything that we want out there at all because of just the crap back and forth that there has been, and it hasn't been a city-driven problem or issue? You know, I don't know.
I think that's a no-win scenario. Because I've been thinking about the same thing. I mean, how do we, I don't know. I mean, we're putting in, not we, but staff is putting so much time and energy into this, and I mean, we're getting nothing out of this, really.
Right, and I guess my question is, when do we stop, like, the back and forth nonsense, from my perspective, in my opinion, that we just, enough is enough. I mean, and we move forward with what we have to move forward with, and let Cedar Lake deal with the decisions that their folks are making on their behalf, and not be able to point fingers at anybody else other than themselves.
I would say it shouldn't come from the city. I think if any of us would want to do that, that would probably be appropriate.
I would say, see what happens on Monday, because that really, it was indicated to me that they will be making a definitive decision on Monday. One thing I might ask the council is if their decision on Monday is to pursue some modification from the contract that's been presented, is there any desire by the council to do that? It'd be helpful for Kate and I to be able to
No.
respond.
No.
It's kind of what I figured, but I wanted to make sure that was the case. So I think on Monday you'll get a decision. Either they're gonna sign the contract or they're not. And even if they, for whatever reason, it gets delayed, I've tried to communicate that 45 days should be more than enough to reach a resolution on the topic, whatever it is. And the township supervisor I'm talking to fully agreed. Actually, she expects it to be resolved on Monday. So I think we'll know on Monday. If they choose not to approve the agreement, which at this point I think is unlikely, that 45 days then provides us an opportunity to sit with Newmarket Township to discuss. When Kate and I met with Newmarket Township, it was our understanding that they assume their request is that we use the modified formula applied to our agreement and split it on the modified formula, and then look to do a long-term agreement, so we're not revisiting this anytime soon. And if at some point Cedar Lake does want to re-enter the fire service area, they would have to live with the formula and the length of the term of the contract that's in place at that time.
I mean, if they wanted to, could they contract with a different city?
They
Yes.
could.
So, I mean,
They can even go without services.
well, right, but I'm just thinking, if there was any talk with New Prague, I guess that would probably be the next fire district, right?
That would be the most likely. I mean, if you look at the four cities that surround them, we've got Prior Lake to the north, Lonsdale to the south, New Prague, and Elko Market. We're probably the best district to serve that portion of their fire district. New Prague would probably be a longer response time. I did, out of curiosity, contact the city of New Prague related to the other 2/3 of the township, the number of calls they had last year, and how much they were charged last year. They were charged $108,000 for services and had, I want to say 20, my number calls are in the mid-20s, I don't want to quote the specific number. When you break it down, overall payment related to size of geography, it's very similar. New Prague is maybe slightly more expensive. When you break it down on a per call basis, we're substantially cheaper though, but that is just one sample year, and that's not a really good analysis because it could turn out that the following year the numbers are absolutely reversed. So all I can say is that there isn't any indication that going with a new Prague, that there necessarily would be a substantial price savings, although I'm not specifically, I don't know about the specifics of their formula and how they allocate costs. So I don't know that there would be a huge savings, but they haven't been very communicative on the topic. But again, they haven't said we're not going to sign it. They haven't said we are going to sign it. They just haven't been indicated one way or the other. So,
Kate, I didn't mean to slay you earlier. I know you've been really involved in this as well.
Oh, that's fine.
Not just staff.
That's okay.
Thank you.
It's been fun.
Any other, any other discussion before we vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right. Passes, so we'll jump into reports. We have administration, assessment policy.
we have Jake, and for those of you that haven't met Jake, this is Jake Sklzacek, our new planner. I think everybody's met him at this point.
So how do you say the last name?
Sklzacek.
Oh, I was way off.
You gotta get your Bohemian on. if you're
I
gonna-
do.
Um,
Is there an HDMI?
There's a, yeah, right here.
Okay.
Yeah, they just-
I cannot even believe Brooks.
Less than a handful, maybe?
Like single digits.
Oh, yeah, I can't imagine it would be any
Was-
higher than that.
I was just shocked to see the 4% number. Thought, yeah, we have enough housing under 200,000.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Mayor, council, and council, I'm Jake Sklzacek, I'm the new city planner. As we go through the presentation, if you guys have any questions, just shout.
Let's get started. So the city's special assessment deferment ordinance was adopted in 2004 by the city of New Market. That's still in effect today. Elko New Market, October 9th of 2008, approved the assessment policy for public initiated improvements.
We are revisiting the topic based on the nature of street improvements in the 2022 to 2026 street reconstruction capital improvement and purchase plan. And public meetings held to this point, staff believes that relief from assessments will likely be sought by some of these residents on these projects.
Minnesota State Statutes, Chapter 435.193 allows the city making a special assessment to defer the payment of that assessment for any homesteaded property owned by a person 65 years or older or retired by virtue of permanent and total disability. Cities are allowed to adopt an ordinance or resolution establishing the standards for determining the existence of a hardship and or disability. So here's our current city policy. Staff has some concerns that section 2, 1 through 5, may be a little bit too prohibitive to those with a disability facing a hardship. However, section 3 does give the city council some flexibility in determining if a hardship exists. The same language is also repeated in the city ordinance. I'll get to that next. But just please note that the city policy does not include any language on military service as a basis for deferment. As we get into the ordinance, I'm not going to read it all, but it does not provide, or the ordinance does not provide clarification on what qualifies a person to be considered permanently and totally disabled, other than that the disability has forced them to retire. The language on military service is included as a basis for deferment in the ordinance. The ordinance does go into detail on the procedure and exceptions, which are almost entirely missing from the policy. The ordinance also includes language on interest and termination related to the special assessment deferment. Again, section 3-1-6 has the language allowing the city council to consider all applications regardless of what qualifications the applicant may meet. So it does give you that flexibility as well. So during the discussion, we just want to remind city council to view this issue objectively, as what is decided will have an impact far beyond this current round of street reconstruction, capital improvement, and purchase plan projects. Staff were able to research what other cities near Elko New Market had included in their ordinances. That information is available in the council memorandum provided, along with copies of the current Elko New Market ordinance and policy. So we're just looking for you guys to provide some guidance if you see a need to change either the ordinance or the policy, or just provide any general input as we move towards these projects.
Well, there is some potential discrepancies between the policy and the ordinance, so part of anything we do will be syncing those up so that they're tighter. But before we do that, we obviously want to get feedback from council, so we're doing it only once. But Jake's right, so when we did like the downtown reconstruction project, that was probably the number one piece of feedback we had, was people asking about deferments. In a lot of those cases, based on our knowledge of the individual and what they were describing for us, most of those individuals probably would not be able to meet the very high bar that you noticed. If you looked at it from like a disability standpoint, it's basically somebody's disabled to the point where they have no means of earning almost any income. The income restrictions for people that are senior citizens, that bar is, I mean, the income is very low, making the bar very high. And so if that's where the council wants to be from a philosophical standpoint, that's great, but we figured it would be best not to be in a situation where you're having an assessment hearing with a room full of people asking for deferments, and you haven't had an opportunity to discuss it objectively without a specific project and specific people standing in front of you at the time.
What happens with, someone has this deferred, what actually happens, they have to defer there?
So there's nothing provided that it gets waived, it gets deferred. So typically what will happen is it'll get put to when they sell their home. But it does mean that the city has to pick up or carry that cost in the interim. If you look at some of the neighborhoods we're going to be doing in the next round of pavement rehab, they're going to be in the older neighborhoods, and because of the cost of housing, you're going to likely have a higher percentage of people that are going to be seeking deferments than some of the other neighborhoods we've done previously.
Don't we still have a concern that legally we won't even be able to assess?
That's a different issue. You're talking
Okay.
special benefit test.
Yeah,
That's a different issue. It's related, but not the same thing. It wouldn't change the assessment amount, it just changed how it gets collected if a deferment is
okay.
So the assessments, it's possible that based on the value of the homes and the amount of benefit that the project provides,
Right.
we may not be able to assess to the full level like that we have as the base in our policy, like 60%, 40%. It might be something less than that. But once that amount has been determined, this just determines whether or not they have to pay it now or it's deferred until
Got it.
a later date.
Okay. Any thoughts?
I think it's a good idea to revisit and get the policy and the ordinance more in line. I think the specifics on it, I'm looking at packet and just some of these other cities and what they're doing with it. It looks like it's almost the norm that there's some type of interest rate that's tied to it as well, correct?
Yeah. Our ordinance does state, I think the interest rate is just similar to other properties on the project. I don't think it specifies an amount. Some cities do. Shakopee, they're at 8%, which seems pretty high.
I like the Belle Plaine approach.
I'd like that too. I was just looking at that
Seems logical.
with a percentage above the bond interest rate.
Yeah.
We have often used that in the past, because the idea is in the meantime, we're paying that bond without that revenue coming in.
Right.
So what that does is it makes sure that we're at least earning interest equivalent to that bond plus some amount to cover the administrative costs or the carrying costs. And that additional amount, you can decide then if you want to include like lost opportunity cost as well. And again, it's a deferment. So the idea is that, yes, we understand that you don't have the income or resources to pay it now, but we will get it when you sell your house out of the sale of the house.
A lot of the cities you will see, they don't mention the military service, National Guard. I wonder if that's because that's a newer amendment to the chapter. A lot of cities are missing that, and that would help explain why the city of Newmarket didn't include that in the original policy.
So it'd be our recommendation that since that's statute, we'd include that automatically, obviously.
We do need to look at some of these disability things, and loss of both arms at shoulder. Who wants to be the bad guy that says,
You're losing out.
it's not quite at the shoulder?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it needs to be revisited.
So what are you thinking, Tom? Do you want like a workshop to do this? Do you guys want to?
We were actually kind of hoping that you guys would have some thoughts, some general direction on what threshold you were, or at least a direction. So right now, for instance, with like the seniors with the income limits, do you feel that's appropriate, or do you think we should be looking at some other limit? You'll notice that some of the cities reference like the HUD income limits, which are going to probably be a little less restrictive than the ones that are currently provided for in the current ordinance. You know, things like that. Even if you don't have a specific number, at least if you can give us a direction, we can prepare something and we can bring back to you guys for feedback.
Just for reference, the poverty thresholds we're going off right now for 2021 and 2022 is kind of, I think, new. But right now, age 65 and older, one person, that threshold's only $12,996. Two people, 65 or older, it's $16,379.
Yeah, it needs to be higher than that, much higher.
I mean, the only way you have somebody residing in that house is if the house was fully paid for a long
Right.
time ago. So what I'm hearing is that you think that the current income limits with regards to financial hardship for senior citizens is maybe a little too restrictive, and we should look at an alternative to that that's a little less restrictive.
Well, yeah, less restricted, it's just more balanced with what our community costs now.
I mean, I think the income limit approach is the fairest way to do it. I do think it needs to be a lot higher. And maybe it's more focused in on the area, Scott County, or even the city. I mean, we have data from previous census, right, that we can look at and base it off of that.
Yep.
I think that would be more fair to look at those numbers.
Something like the 30% of.
Right.
And then that'll fluctuate over time, obviously, as things change. We don't have to go in and specify different amounts.
Yep.
We'll take a look at some index or indexes that better balance that.
I'm hearing the general appetite to do some some changes. I don't know that I have a lot of specifics that I can necessarily offer.
Well, we've got time, so one of the approaches we can take is that Jake can go back and he can craft a starting point based on this feedback, and then we can fine tune it from there. So the intent wouldn't be coming back with an action item, but we need an item for further discussion and direction. So,
Yep, sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice job for your first one.
Yeah,
Thank you.
nice tie.
Yeah. Tom actually tied the tie for you.
you didn't have to tell me that.
That made
Oh, I love it. That's
That was
awesome.
great.
How many minutes are we into the YouTube clip for that one?
1 hour,
We cut
18
that, throw it on
minutes.
Facebook.
That was good.
Anything from Public Works? Reports?
No.
Police?
No.
Fire?
No.
Engineering?
No.
Community development?
Uh,
Looking at you, Jake. Got nothing? All right. Parks? There's minutes of the last Parks meeting, or draft minutes, I should say. Anything in additional? CCEC.
Minutes are in the packet. We talked about fire and rescue days. Why did you look at me like that?
You're talking.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Discussion of fire and rescue days, essentially I would say the one change, well, there's not gonna be a street dance put on by the fire department. There will still be a parade. We're gonna bump it up and try an 11 o'clock start time. Yeah, so far, we're likely not gonna have any activities in the park this year, but looking forward to what we can come up with for next year. That's what I got.
All right.
Oh, I haven't asked the Grand Marshal yet if he wants to be the Grand Marshal, but we are going to ask Dennis Melgard if he would like
Nice.
to be the Grand Marshal after his many years of service, and I'm very excited to be able to ask him.
That's
So
awesome.
Thanks, Linda, for giving me that opportunity.
That's excellent.
And then the other, and based on some feedback I've gotten from council people, it sounds like the council would be open to, well, quite honestly, there was discussion about grand marshals and stuff, and there was a desire by the CCBC to also honor Mark Nagel for the time and effort he's put into the city, and so, but feedback I've had from council is that you guys don't have an issue with us basically having a Mark float in the parade. So,
I want Mark.
he's super excited about it, so.
Oh, good.
That's great. That's perfect.
The Mark.
Other reports, scales in 2 weeks, scale exec is next week, so no report, anything for service delivery?
No, for Scale Exec Joe, I'll be at a conference, so I won't be at that.
Okay. MBTA?
Can I ask a blunt question? What are we doing on that?
Thank you.
Like what?
Thank you for
Why?
asking.
So the original intent with transit is originally Scott County had its own transit group because
Right.
prior Lake and Shakopee had their own transit
Mhm.
entities, and they worked together, and it was called Blue Express. And then what happened over time is was just the issue of being an opt-out and the clout with the Met Council with regards to decisions regarding capital dollars and everything else. And just the fact that it was growing, and the cities themselves, they didn't have the infrastructure to continue to manage it in the way it should. So there was a decision, and we participated on that technical team group, and I was up there. And the rationale for that was stuff in transit has incredibly long cycles from planting the seeds to implementation. It can be like 10 years to implement a route and things like that. By the time you get funding for it, get it set up, actually get it established, run it, all of that. So the thought was, and we were participating because, well, that allows us to know what's going on, be engaged at the table, and be in at the ground floor and help basically push any transit concerns, desires, wishes that we had going long term. Ultimately, Blue Express decided to merge with MBTA, and so it was just kind of a transfer that when that moved over, we would move over, and MBTA did contact us and said, hey, you are within our potential future service area, these things are long cycle, we have other non-voting entities which participate where we don't specifically provide service. So if you want a seat at the table, great, and so we decided to participate. So that's the logic behind it, value of it. That would be up to the council to assess.
Yeah, I personally do not see transit coming to Elko New Market in the next 10 years. That's just my personal opinion.
I'm with you.
And I do not see any need to continue logging on for these meetings.
I got you.
I'm just being, I mean, they got a lot of great information for specific to their areas and what they're doing, and bravo to them. I applaud them for the work that they've been doing, because they've obviously, they're moving in the right direction for services for those cities, but there's, in my opinion, there's no reason for us to be at the table.
They came out here a few years ago. I was not mayor, I was council member, and gave a presentation, and it was good information, but it seems just strikingly clear. It was nowhere in our immediate future that this was going to happen. I mean, I would support not participating.
they've taken a run at trying to get, when there's been buckets of money around, they've taken a run at trying to get some dollars to do like a trial route to see, kind of proof of concept type of deal. They've been unsuccessful getting that. And the reality is we won't have transit down here until we enter the transit taxing district. And even then, it might be a long time before we get transit. So it's just a question of how far ahead of the curve do we want to be engaged.
How hard is it to from your opinion, I mean, how hard would it be to re-engage? If there was a rational reason for us to be engaged, would they push back and say, hey, you guys left?
Honestly, I think it will depend on the board, MBTA board at the time, and whether they consider the value. The board that was in place at the time was super collaborative, and you also remember, you then all of a sudden just had our partners in Scott County moving over. I think the other benefit when it was Blue Express is these were building relationships. There's the side benefit of building relationships with people we work with on a regular basis. Most of MBTA is Dakota County, and they tend to be entities, quite honestly, that we don't regularly have any other contact with except for this contact point.
Does John Ulrich still attend those meetings? Maybe you don't know because you're probably driving and listening.
Yeah,
That's what I would.
I honestly don't know if he is.
Because I know that, I feel like that the board is still, like, well, as of last year, very collaborative, whereas if we left and we came back, we would be invited back in.
The current board, I would have no concerns about that.
Yeah.
There's really no reason for us to be there.
I would be shocked if a board said, no, we don't want you guys to be part of any discussions or anything.
So there's an option that I could explore with their staff, is just simply not attending, because as an ex officio member, they had to basically amend the JPA to allow us to be a board member. So for us to leave officially, they would have to go through that process again. It might be one, we're a non-voting member. It could just be one where we can just go on.
I mean, if we stop showing up, would they care? I mean,
Would they even
I was told at one
would they
point.
remove us or anything?
I was told they had other ex officio member. We're the ex officio member that shows up. If you talk to some of our previous participants, like former Mayor Bob and things like that, and having talked with some of them, they're like, you guys show up more than some of our regular members.
I
So,
feel like Farmington has never showed up.
and they're an ex officio member as well.
Yeah.
They were used as an example. So I think we could go on hiatus.
Still get the materials sent, and then if there's topics that make sense for, I mean, it's a lot of these committees and task forces that you join, you sign me up, send me the crap, and then I'll show up when it's needed.
I'd be willing to review the board, the packets and things and take that over if you do not want to be doing that.
Well, I mean, I don't have a problem reviewing, agendas and whatnot, but we just don't need to be there, plain and simple. I mean, there's no point to sit on a call for an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes, to listen to their agenda of what they've got going on for their local service demand and stuff like that.
In fairness, though, I don't think we've ever pushed on anything, but going back to previous point, I don't know we're at that point where we can, I don't know if there's any downside to just not showing up, because we don't have a vote, so we don't have a role that has a material thing. Although they generally treated us like a voted member when we had an opinion, told that we want to be engaged, but I don't know that us not being there won't affect their daily business, so to speak.
Just stop showing.
Well, and I think if we're still getting the agendas and we see something that might pertain to us or be of interest, then one of us just hops on it.
Yeah.
So
Let's move forward.
Yep, I'll just propose that I'll contact their staff and let them know that due to time demands with us, we aren't going to be attending on a regular basis.
We have the most
Going
time
forward.
we've ever spent on a BTA, so. I-35.
No report.
Perfect. Discussion by council.
Had a good first meeting of the school climate task force or whatever that was last week, 2 weeks ago, I don't remember. Good first meeting, lots of people showed up, good conversations. It wasn't as meaty as the next couple will be, so we'll see how they go, but it was fun sitting. They had it nice and broken up of parents with community members, with students, and then board members were all at different tables, so it was kind of fun to just see the diversity of, not, there was no diversity, I mean, there just isn't in our community. But it was a good conversation, first one, so.
Nice.
And then the students, I mean, I gotta give a shout out to some of those students, man. I mean, it took some courage to say some of the stuff and kind of talk about their lived experiences and everything, so it was cool.
That's awesome.
I would make a comment if we ever have a movie that's being filmed in town again, that all of us come together and talk about it, and
Promote
figure out
about it.
a communication plan to the residents so they don't bombard us with hateful
Well, it's
text messages
it's
of,
so
I
comical
didn't
to
know
me,
what
though.
was going on.
I mean, you could flip this and see how positive this could be, but
Yeah.
then it's just like, my God, people complain about something.
In fairness, staff didn't know what the details were until the final details were until the day was.
See, but we'd be pissed if it was in Lonsdale and not here,
Yeah.
you know? So it's just
Yeah.
like, you can't make anybody happy, so.
Any other discussion?
Over here.
Any motions to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Kate,
Second.
second by Bryce, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.